Good afternoon to all. Today I'll be handling different types of research methods. This is also a part of the first unit of our syllabus. So the major research problems usually that we address can be categorized as shown in the screen. There are exploratory questions that we are going to address. Some examples are: what is the case, and what are the key factors? If you are addressing such questions in your research, then they are actually exploratory questions. Generally, we are exploring the facts. And there are descriptive questions. Descriptive questions may include how many and what is the incidence of X, and are X and Y are related. So this type of questions can be described as descriptive questions. Now there are casual questions. Why and what are the causes of X or Y? So if you are asking a general casual question of why, which needs some explanation, then that type of questions were casual questions. Then evaluative questions are there, which include what was the outcome of X. So we are evaluating the outcome of X, and has P been successful in its achieving its target, for example. So they are actually evaluative. So basically, we will wait for the results and see the outcome. Now there is a predictive questions. What will be the effect of X? What will be the effect of X to be on Y? So that type of, for example, a changing weather pattern, whether it will affect the the rainfall or not. That type of questions were predictive questions. Now historical questions are there. What led, why happening? So what is the reason or historical reason behind something what has happened, and what are the events that led to some particular event, or what caused, for example, a tsunami or some flooding, something. So what is actually what is the result, what caused that particular event? That type of such questions were categorized as historical questions. Now there is some difference between research design and research methodology. When we come to research design, they are actually focused on the end product. So it is product oriented, whereas methodology is actually procedure based. So there is a slight difference between research design and research methodology. The focus is on the end product in case of research design. So what kind of a study is being planned and what kind of results are aimed at? So that's more important in case of such a research design. The product is important. Example is are given there, like a comparative study, or interpret a historical comparative study, interpretive approach, or exploratory study, or inductive or deductive studies, etc. These studies were actually they are product oriented, or and whereas in the other case where research methodology is concerned, we have a focus on research process and the kind of tools and procedures that we are using. It is not on the product or the result that you are focusing on. And example is document analysis, survey, and analysis of existing data, statistics, etc., in which you adopt some tools and procedures for that research methodology. So research methodology and research design is slightly different. That's what I am trying to explain. So the research design is basically driven by research problem or the question, whereas research methodology is driven by specific tasks such as data collection or sampling at hand. So basically, for a scientific research, you need a proper, for example, if you are trying to solve some problems with a hypothesis, a product oriented hypothesis, basically you require a research design. Whereas the methodology, research methodology simply that indicates only some kind of data collection and analysis and other things, or the procedure and protocols that you are using. Okay. Focus on the research design, focus on logic of research, what evidence is required to address the question adequately. For example, if you want to prove your hypothesis, what type of logic is required and what type of evidence is required. That type of objective should be there for a research design, whereas for a research methodology, focus is on the individual and individual steps in the research process, or the method, step-by-step methods or the process, and the most objective procedure to be employed. So that is also on the procedure and process that the research methodology is focused, whereas on the logic of the research and the evidence or the nature of the evidence that is required, and the total end product of that design or the research is of primary concern in case of a research design. So basically, if you are trying to prove something based on a hypothesis and then trying to develop some new evidence to prove that hypothesis, your research design should be it should not be just based on some procedures and protocols. It should be based on some logic and methods for collecting such evidences. Now, type of research methods, there is a long list that is presented there. You can have some methods like basic research and applied research. Then fixed and flexible research is there. Then quantitative and qualitative research is there. Experimental versus non-experimental research is there. Casual or explanatory research is there. Conclusive and exploratory research is there. Then descriptive, historical, diagnostic, prognostic, evaluative, ex post facto and casual comparative, then correlational. So we have a very long list of them, of different research methods. You will have a quick look on these different types of methods. So this is another slide in which some examples of such methods were given. So basically, descriptive, if you are considering the descriptive, case studies, naturalistic observations and surveys were coming under the descriptive category. Correlational means the case control studies and observational studies were basically coming under correlational methods of research. Then semi-experimental, like field experiment or quasi-experiment, it's not a full-fledged experiment. That type of work were based on semi-experimental research. Then a review, and basically we have literature review and systematic literature review, in which Prisma framework is used. There comes under the review-based research. Then meta-analysis is an advanced form of such a review-based research, where already existing data from various studies will be gathered together and that will be compiled. Actually, the scientist who is performing such meta-analysis based research is not actually doing he is not doing any experimental component, but he's just collecting all the, say, 100 papers that are available in a particular topic. All the papers will be collected and see what are the data presented by them, and he will try to consolidate and statistically analyze the data and summarize the results, and that type of research is known as a meta-analysis. So these are some of the examples of such types of research. Now we'll come to that types of research one by one. Basic versus applied. So the applied research is also referred to as an action research, and the basic research is sometimes called as fundamental or pure research. So the applied research is an action research. So applied research aims at finding a solution for an immediate problem faced by the society, or an individual, or a business or institution. So, or any solution based, or a research that aims at a solution, to find a solution to a problem faced by society, individual or industry, whatever. That type of research is applied research. Whereas fundamental research is mainly concerned with the generalization and with the formulation of a theory. So the basic scientific theory was developed by basic research. So you can just look into your own institutes, even our universities and even whether in Indian institutes, where all our research were basically focused on basic research. It is not applied. If it is applied, that should be sufficient for transferring the technology to the industry, develop some products or solving some problems and make it economically viable. All these things will be there. Basically, European countries and or even US based research institutes, even the universities, they, as you know, they collaborate with the industries, and most of the research will be be in the applied field. So, for example, the universities may produce a technology like the technology for the PCR or the Taq polymerase or say or a COVID vaccine. All such types of technology will be developed in the institutes, and that will be transferred to the concerned industry for commercialization. And the COVID vaccine is one of the examples, Oxford vaccine, where academic research is based on applied research, and that technology is subsequently transferred to the industry. Whereas basic research, they generally contribute to the knowledge development of the society, and it may not be a product oriented one or a solution oriented one. So here you can have a comparative account of the basic and applied researches. Fundamental research tries to eliminate the theory by uh, adding to the basics of a discipline. So fundamental research actually it contributes to the discipline, the basic knowledge of the discipline, it develops the basic knowledge of the discipline. Whereas applied research aims to solve a problem by adding to the field of application of the discipline. So one is to the basic knowledge and theory of the discipline, and another is adding to the applied field of the discipline. And fundamental research, in that case, problems are analyzed from the point of one discipline. So basically, fundamental research cannot be done in a broad discipline. So, for example, just the say vaccine, uh, you can perform. The problems are analyzed from one point of the discipline. You work on a particular focused point on developing a particular technology, and often in the case of applied research, often several disciplines work together to solve the problem. So if you are a microbiologist is working on his own field, he is actually basically working in his own field in the development on and contribution to the field of science in a basic discipline, in a basic research. Whereas such applied researches may not be limited to a particular discipline. For example, it may require contribution microbiology, biotechnology, or industry, or maybe bioinformatics. Various fields or disciplines needs to be converged together to solve the single issue, so that it can be made applied. Okay. Now, generalizations are preferred in case of fundamental research or basic research, whereas in applied research, often research is individual cases without aim to generalize. So an applied research is very specific. So if you change some of the parameters, it may not be useful. For example, you develop a vaccine. If you change some of the parameters or some conditions, it will not be useful. So in that case, it's a very specific kind of research, applied research. Whereas some generalizations can be developed in case of a fundamental or a basic research. Forecasting approach is implemented in case of fundamental research, and in case of applied research, it aims to show things how things can be changed, and that is one of the difference in case of these two. Then assumes what other variables do not change. So basic research assumes that other variables do not change. So we can fix on some of the variables. Suppose x and y are fixed, then what will be the effect? So a basic research can assume other variables do not change, or we can fix them. So under a particular fixed conditions of other variables, your variable will respond in a particular way. That can be explained using a basic research. So usually in our basic research, we assume many of the parameters are static or unchanging or fixed. There will be fixed variables. So in actual conditions, such fixed variables will not be there. You have to acknowledge that other variables are constantly changing and they will be continuously affecting the actual effect of that test. So applied research need to consider all the other parameters. So for example, the efficacy of a vaccine, every factor that is related with that particular efficacy of a vaccine needs to be considered. You cannot say if X and Y are fixed or static, this vaccine will be effective. That cannot be mentioned in case of applied research. Then reports are compiled in a language of technical language of the discipline. Reports are compiled in a common language that is understandable to common public. So that is the applied research needs to be translated and it needs to be understood by the other people from other domain. Whereas fundamental research or basic research can be they actually focus on their own field, their own discipline. So you can more often you can use technical languages. Whereas applied research needs a commonly understandable language and way of presentation. So the second category is fixed versus flexible research. In fixed designs, the design of a study is fixed before the main stage of data collection takes place. So the study design is fixed in case of fixed research. So you first of all you fix the steps that you are going to follow, and then you go for collection of the data. The fixed designs are normally theory driven, otherwise it is impossible to know in advance what are the variables to be controlled and measured. So if you have a better understanding on the theory, then you can say the pH and temperature and the factor X and Y are the contributing variables. So you know the theory behind that. So then you can straightly go for fixing these variables as the data collection points. You can go with your study design. So that's a fixed design, and often these variables are measured quantitatively. So that's one of the points of this fixed research. Whereas when we come to the flexible designs allow for more freedom during the data collection process. One reason for using a flexible research design can be that variables of interest is not quantitatively measurable, such as culture, which is not quantitatively measurable. In other cases, theory might not be available before one starts the research. If you don't have a strong theoretical background to explain what are the interacting variables and how they interact, then it is not possible to decide whether such a factor or such a contributing variable needs to be included in the study or not. You can't design that one. So during the process of the research, you understand that this is a significant variable that you want to address that can be incorporated because it is a flexible design. An example of a flexible research design is a grounded theory research, which is a systematic research approach that works to develop a process and action or an interaction about a substantive topic. So if your theory is not so good, it's a grounded theory, and then if you are performing such research on that one, on that no, it's a not well supported theory, then you can adopt a flexible research design, and in the process and the action and interaction, all these things will be variable. And during the process of the research or progress of the research, you can change the variables that you want to consider. So that type of research is known as a flexible research. So the only difference is that in fixed research, we are working on a preset or pre-designed set of variables. Whereas in case of a flexible design, we don't have a clear-cut idea on the theory and the interacting variables. So you will start working, and during the working and throughout the experiment, we will revise the procedure, and we will incorporate other variables that supports our theory. So the next category is a quantitative versus qualitative research. Am I clear? Just want to verify that we are online. Hello? Yes, fine. So the next category is, as I mentioned, is a quantitative versus qualitative research. Quantitative research involves measuring a phenomenon in multiple grades, whereas qualitative research usually requires Boolean measurements only. And suitability of a solution can be studied qualitatively by comparison between candidate solutions requires quantitative operation. So that this can be these quantitative research actually it involves uh, different groups uh, like measuring this phenomenon or what phenomenon that we are observing. That phenomenon needs to be measured in multiple grids, whereas qualitative research usually there is not quantitative measurement of that variable. Okay, it will be based basically on classes. Different groups or classes will be applied in case of qualitative research, and quantitative research can be measured in a scalar manner, so that every possible values can be assumed in case of a quantitative research. And suitability of a solution can be studied qualitatively, but comparison, for example, you can say whether something will affect male population or female population. It's a grouping, and that means it can be qualitatively measured. Or whether it will the COVID will affect elderly people or youngsters or even children, so they can group them, and suitability of that, for example, the vaccine efficacy or the COVID mortality, whatever, that can be applied and it can be qualitatively measured based on such groups. Whereas if you want to compare between candidate solutions that requires quantitative observations, then you require quantitative research. Now, experimental versus non-experimental research is there. That means experimental research is when a researcher is able to manipulate the predictor variable and subject to identify a cause and effect relationship. So, experimental research is done, and it's the experimenter or the researcher is able to manipulate the variable, predictor variable. So, and subject to identify the cause and effect relationship can be identified by manipulating the variables. So, it's not a preset variable. So, in that case, the experimental variables can be manipulated by the researcher. And this typically requires the research to be conducted in a lab. So, if you want to manipulate a variable, it should not be a natural event or an environmental variable. So the variable needs to be it is to be under your control, so that you can increase it or decrease it. So that predictor variable needs to be manipulated in a case of experimental research. For example, the pH or temperature that can be varied, experimentally varied. So it's a variable that can be subject to manipulation. But in some cases, for the weather or something, and that is not under your control. You cannot manipulate that one. Okay, so this typically requires the research to be conducted in a lab, with one group being placed as an experimental group or the one being manipulated. So the experimental group is a manipulated group, while the other is placed as a placebo group or a control group or inert condition and non-manipulated group. So there should be a control group, unmanipulated group, and there should be a manipulated. This is what we are actually using in our experimental works, where you will have a control group. For example, if you are performing some works on rats, then you administer some drug and see the effectiveness. Then there will be a group or a set of rats that will act as the placebo or the control group or unmanipulated group. Then the other one there are one or two experimental groups. According to your research design, you will have experimental groups in which you are performing the manipulation. Maybe you will administer the drug or the drug at various concentrations, and you can analyze that, or you can compare the results from this control group and the experimental groups. The laboratory-based experience gives a high level of control and reliability. So, in experimental designs, this laboratory-based, as a controlled environment in the laboratory, gives you high level of control and reliability. Whereas the case of non-experimental research, this research is a label. This research, non-experimental research label, is given to a study when a researcher cannot control or manipulate or alter the predictor variable or subjects, but instead relies on interpretation, observation, interactions, or come to a conclusion. So if you are, for example, if you are there are films like somebody is trying to do some research on a tornado, There was a film like that. And it is not a phenomenon that is under your control. You cannot manipulate it. The only possibility is that you can try to interact, you can observe, you can interpret. That is the only possibility. And that form of research, or the predictor variables which is not under your control. And if you are relying on that type of variables for your research, then that is a non-experimental research. Typically, this means that non-experimental research must rely on correlations, surveys, case studies, and cannot demonstrate a true cause and effect relationship. And even, for example, generally medical research, in a lot of if you are trying for some development of a drug and different stages of the clinical trials, that may be an experimental part. But otherwise, if you are just depending upon such case studies, or what is called cohort studies, etc., which is a normal in case of medical research, where they are performing the research based on some observations. They cannot manipulate the patients. They cannot change the parameters. It's only observational, and based on that observation, you can reach conclusions. Case study is maybe in case of a case study, a single patient will be taken, and all the parameters of that patient will be recorded as a case study. So that type of research is also there. But the difference is that there is no manipulation. You are not manipulating the variables, or you are not administering anything. You cannot change the circumstances. That type of research is usually non-experimental research. Now that's next one is casual research. Casual research is also known as exploratory research. And this casual research is conducted in order to identify the extent and nature of cause and effect relationships. Casual research can be conducted in order to assess the impact of specific changes on existing norms or various processes, etc. It's a very casual observational research, and it can be conducted to assess the impact of something on some particular process or some other events. So that type of research is a casual research. Casual studies focus on the analysis of a situation or a specific problem to explain the patterns of relationships between the variables. Experiments are the most popular primary data collection methods in the studies with a casual research design. So in casual research, we are just trying to explain something. It is an explanatory research. It is not our intention to reach to a conclusion or something. We are just trying to explain things, or to find some cause and effect relationship between some variables, etc. So it is not a conclusive research. So casual research is just trying to get some cause and effect relationship between the parameters. And the presence of a cause and effect relationship can be confirmed only if specific causal evidences exist. So you can design experiments, or you can observe things, so that cause and effect relationships can be determined or can be established using an exploratory or casual research. Then the causal evidence has three important components. One is temporal sequence. The cause must occur before the effect. For example, it would not be appropriate to credit the increase in sales to rebranding efforts if the increase had started before the rebranding. So you are, for example, in this case, you are just trying to establish to see whether there is any relationship between increase in sales and the rebranding of the product. So there is two variables: increase in sales and rebranding. So a temporal sequence, in this case, if you can establish that increase in sales is due to rebranding only if rebranding has occurred previously, and then there should be an increase in the sales. But if the sales has already started increasing before the rebranding effort, then there is no point in that stating that the rebranding is actually associated with, or it is affected by, or the sales is actually improved by rebranding. That is not possible. So there should be a temporal sequence of events. Means which one is happening first. So rebranding should happen first, then its effect should be evident in the subsequent sales. So if it is in the reverse order, then it is not possible to explain that cause and effect relationship in the causal research. So that temporal sequence is important. Another one, concomitant variation. The variation must be systematic between two variables. For example, if a company doesn't change its employee training and development practices, then changes in customer satisfaction cannot be caused by the employee training and development. It is another example. So here, if the company doesn't change their policies or practices on employee training, customer satisfaction cannot be connected with the that particular event. So this is another mode of variation. It means the variation must be systematic between two variables. So it should happen simultaneously. Okay. If the company changes their training policies and development practices, then there should be a corresponding increase or concomitant variation that should be observed in the customer satisfaction. So usually these two things will happen simultaneously. Okay. Then non-spurious association is another one. Any covariation between a cause and effect must be true and not simply due to another variable. So in other words, there should not be any third variable that relates to both. So if you are establishing a relationship between A and B, so A is affecting B, you are establishing a cause and effect relationship between A and B, and then you have to make sure that C is not involved in that process. So if there is a third variable that affects both, then your conclusion will be false, because it is not only the effect of A that is changing B, because there is another factor that you are ignoring. So such third factors or non-spurious association that should not be there. So any covariation between the cause and effect must be true. So if A is affecting B, then it should be very clear, and A is the only factor, or A should be the only factor or the clear factor that is affecting B. So along with that, for example, in the previous example, ഞാനും എന്താണ് ഉറുമ്പ് പറയുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ, ഞാനും ആനയും കൂടി ഞാനും സിംഹവും കൂടി ആനയെ കൊന്നു എന്ന് പറയുന്നൊരു ഇതില്ലേ. അപ്പൊ ആ രൂപത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു ഇത് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് കാര്യമില്ല, ബിക്കോസ് there is a major third factor that is playing in the event, then that needs to be addressed. So this is some of the factors with the causal research. Basically, the causal research is trying to establish some cause and effect relationships, but there should be a proper sequence for that. For example, the cause should be first and effect should be second. You cannot reverse the order. And if the effect is established first, then you cannot attribute it to the cause. That is the temporal sequence. And then for non-spurious association, there should not be any other factors that you are ignoring and influencing the same research. Okay, so that is about the causal research. And there are conclusive versus exploratory researches. And in this case, the exploratory research only aims to explore the research area, and they do not attempt to offer a final or conclusive answer to the research question. So here, final answer or final word on that research is not made by the exploratory research. They are actually just exploring the area to develop further knowledge. And conclusive studies, on the contrary, aim to provide final and conclusive answers to the research question. So exploratory is not reaching till the end, or it is not making any conclusions or final remarks on that topic. Whereas conclusive research offers a final remark, or it offers a final solution to the research problem. So that's the difference between conclusive and exploratory research. So here you can see the table in which the structure is loosely structured in design. That is exploratory is loosely structured. A well-structured and systematic design is required for conclusive research, because there should not be any gaps. If you want to reach a conclusion, there should not be any gaps. So that structure of that methodology, that needs to be very good and structured. So Methodology should be flexible and investigative in methodology, and that is for exploratory research. Whereas have a formal and definitive methodology that needs to be followed and tested. So that's for conclusive research. And hypothesis, it do not involve testing of a hypothesis. These exploratory research do not involve testing of a hypothesis. It's just an exploratory work, whereas most conclusive researches are carried out to test a formulated hypothesis. So there should be structured methodology and schematic design, a systematic design, and very definitive methodology, and very well formulated hypothesis, etc., are required for a conclusive research, which is not required for an exploratory research. Then findings are significant as they have a theoretical or applied implication, and whereas findings might not be not that much significant in the case of exploratory research. So we are not reaching any final conclusion or a final word. We are not saying any final word in case of an exploratory research, whereas conclusive research may offer you a final solution, and basically theoretical and applied implications will be there for a conclusive research. Then the next one is descriptive research. Descriptive research is only why and what, and it is dealt with. Descriptive research deals with why and what, and normally it doesn't deals with the how. So if you are asking the question how, then you what are the benefits of a multimedia textbook as compared to the print textbooks? So that's you are addressing such a question. So that can be described. What are the benefits of this particular context? That can be explained. So why and what can be explained descriptively, but how, that requires a higher level of knowledge development. Okay, and more structured and explanatory research is this descriptive research, and static single phenomena like a public opinion is one example of this descriptive research. For example, if you want to generate a public on a single phenomena like a public opinion, then you can do such a descriptive research. And there are dynamic cases also where cross-sectional and or longitudinal studies were done. It's not a simple, it's not on a single phenomena. If you are trying to address multiple phenomena, multiple events, then you can have dynamic designs also in case of descriptive research. A single phenomenon, if you are addressing, is a very static or single phenomenon, and like it's like a public opinion that can be described using descriptive research. And there are dynamic research, dynamic designs of descriptive research is also there, where cross-sectional studies which involves various other parameters, not a single phenomena, but multiple factors can be considered, compiled together, and in case of such dynamic approaches for descriptive research. This includes surveys, survey studies like assess characteristics of a whole population, and interrelationship studies, relationship among data like case studies, causal comparative studies, or correlation studies, etc. Then developmental studies that changes as function of time, like growth, trend, model development, etc. So the various fields of a study were included in such a dynamic or cross-sectional studies. Okay, so in which multiple, for example, the characteristics of an overall population. So it is not a single point. So there are a lot of factors that needs to be considered if you are performing such a survey on the characteristics of a population, and that requires a lot of analysis, and also interrelationship studies among data, and that also coming under the same category like some case studies or causal comparative studies or correlational studies, etc. Then developmental studies is another category in which it changes, the data changes as a function of time. So with the time it will change, for example, growth, trend, etc. So it will change, the data will change with the forward movement of time. So that is as a function of time, such changes will, development studies will change its value. And one example is some economic growth or trend, etc. That they are that type of analysis were coming under developmental studies. So these are all various methods of descriptive research in which we are trying to address the questions what and why it is so, and what is the reason for that. That type of questions can be addressed by a descriptive research. So here there is another table which shows a casual research, exploratory research, and descriptive research. So the amount of uncertainty characterizing decision situation. So it's clearly defined. Casual research, it is clearly defined, whereas in exploratory research, it is highly ambiguous. There is no clear. It's the amount of the final solution is not actually offered in an exploratory research. Now, descriptive research actually it is partially defined. The characterizing decision situation is partially defined in case of a descriptive research. Whereas the key research statement is a research hypothesis in case of casual research. Whereas here the research question is there, but hypothesis is not. In the other two cases, there is a research question, a clear-cut theory-driven hypothesis is not there for descriptive and exploratory researches. But whereas casual research is having such a hypothesis with a theory-driven hypothesis is there. And when it is conducted, later stages of decision making is that is casual research is done at later stages of decision making because we already have the basic knowledge and background of or scientific background, whatever that data is already there. So we can go to the final stage of decision making with a very clear hypothesis and casual research through casual research. Whereas in the initial stages of the research, we don't have such a hypothesis, and in the early stages of decision making and in the later stages of decision making, we only have a here in the exploratory research, it's in the initial stages of decision making, and we don't have a clear hypothesis at that point. So we are just exploring the things, and we are not making any conclusions. Here in descriptive research, we are trying to address some questions like why and what, etc. But still, it is still at the later stages of the decision making. It is actually better than exploratory research. Descriptive is better than exploratory research because here this comes at the later stages of the decision making, not in the early stage, because at least we can answer something, some questions like why, what, etc. And in this case, it is not like that because exploratory research is just exploring the cause and effect relationships, and very clear answer is not available using exploratory research. Now, usual research approach is highly structured in case of a casual research, whereas the other two are unstructured. And there are some examples like will consumers buy more products in a blue package? So it's very specific question. Which of the which of two advertising campaigns will be more effective? So it's a very clear question, and that can be verified, and the decision can be made from the data. Whereas in our sales are declining for no apparent reason. So it's a vague statement. And what kind of new products are fast food consumers interested in? So this, if you want to address this question, you need a very exploratory research. You need to try to find a reason for that. Okay, so that's only the preliminary stage of the research in which you have a phenomenon in your hand and you want to find the cause and effect relationship by observing various parameters. But you can't reach a final conclusion like that of the previous one. And in case of descriptive research, what kind of people patronize our stores compared to our primary competitor? So this is one category. And another you can have a question, what or why, like that. So what product features are most important to our customers? So here you are trying to describe the nature of the customers or the people and try to reach a more generalized conclusion. But in this case, a very specific answer is possible because we have a research hypothesis, and you can have clear-cut parameters which can be compared, and a highly structured way of decision making can be made. And this is casual research is when you compare the three, casual research will be better because it is based on a research hypothesis and is structured, and it can give you a final conclusive answer. Whereas in the other one, the other two, it is not like that. And when you compare these two, the exploratory research is actually very basic because we have a phenomena and you are trying to just find out the cause and effect relationship, and you can't just pinpoint that to anything. Whereas in case of descriptive research, you have some basic information on that, and you will try to address some questions like why, what, etc. from that available knowledge. So that is a descriptive research. Now the next one is a historical research. The historical research is one type of qualitative research, and which involves examining past events to draw conclusions and make predictions about the future. So you analyze the past events and predict the future. So that's what's happening in historical research. The steps in historical research are formulate an idea, formulate a plan, gather data, analyze data, and analyze the source of data, etc. So first of all, the data is already there, and you analyze the data. You based on you formulate the idea, and then you plan to work accordingly. Then you collect the data and analyze it, and finally you interpret that data. So examine past events, and it should be qualitative. Then primary source is a relic, remains, or artifacts, etc. Then secondary source is textbook, a newspaper, periodicals, etc. And there are criticisms like external or genuineness of the source, and internal based on accuracy and competence of the writer, etc. So if you are doing a historical research and relying upon something, you know that nowadays intentional or every century we can see some rulers or some governments will usually try to change the history. If because they will remove some of the evidences, and they plan their own the evidences which supports their point of view. So which means history is actually influenced by the personal interests always. So if you depend upon relics and other active artifacts, etc., certainly there is a possibility that there is a we can question the genuineness of the source. So that is an external factor that affects the conclusion. So if the source is not genuine, or the data is not genuine, then historical data is not genuine, then certainly it affects the final prediction. And also there are internal problems, because that depends on the accuracy of the writer, or the researcher who is performing that one. So if you say take a Nannangadi or something from some locality, and say that it is actually 400 years old or 4,000 years old, then without proper scientific evidence, or then your interpretation and on the timeline will be different. So historical facts or historical interpretations should be based on proper or genuine sources, and of course the accuracy and competence of the writer or who is interpreting that work is also important. So then only you can rely upon that type of historical research. Now, prognostic research is another category. Prognosis research provides information crucial to the understanding, explaining, and predicting future clinical outcomes in people with existing disease or conditions. So that is more important in case of medical field. If you can predict the outcome of people's future outcome of the people's based on such evidences, then that is a disease prognosis is possible. So a prognostic model is a formal combination of multiple predictors from which risks of a specific endpoint can be calculated for individual patients. So it's a formal combination of multiple predictive factors. A prognostic model is a combination of multiple predictive factors from which risks of specific endpoint or specific future can be calculated for individual patients. The future outcome or endpoint of a future of a patient can be predicted based on multiple predictive factors of a patient. So for every individual patient, you can analyze such predictive variables and try to reach a conclusion about their future disease condition. Now, the prognostic model research has three main phases. One is a model development, including internal validation, and second one is an external validation. Then, third one is a investigations of impact in a clinical practice. So, this is some methods or some steps on the prognostic model, and there we have, as I mentioned, a model development needs to be there. Then, external validation and investigation on the impact of the clinical practice to prove that this is working. So you can develop a model, then you can validate the model, and finally see that whether your interpretation on this model or the research model is working or not, and in the clinical practice that is also possible. So the next one is evaluation research. The evaluation research is used to determine the impact of a social intervention. So a social intervention is an action taken within a social context designed to produce an intended result. So usually social interventions are the actions taken in the society to produce a desired effect. So the evaluation research thus analyzes the impact of a particular program on a certain social problem from social problem the program is trying to solve. For example, there should be scientific and experimental models is there, it should be required, and then management-oriented models are there, and qualitative anthropological methods are there, participant-oriented based methods are there. So the various types of methods are there. Anyway, the basic idea is that if you are making a social intervention, like say even the government maybe changing the land rules so that everybody all the Keralites were now having land because of the change of the land policies, and that is a social intervention. Or you vaccinate the population, that's another social intervention. For example, universal vaccination, and so that or eradication, for example, polio. So that is another effect. Such type of social interventions have a desired effect, and that may be based on a scientific model or a management oriented. That can be the same thing can be, for example, say the financial packages for boosting the economy. US or various at the time of recession, various countries will have some financial booster packages that is declared. So which means that it will boost the economy. It will have its own impact. So such type of interventions at a management level or anthropological, qualitative anthropological methods level, and participant oriented or disease means vaccination level, etc. So there are various stages in which you can have such a social interventions made, and that type of interventions will result in evaluation results. If you take the result and to see that whether the predicted outcome of that intervention is there or not, you analyze that one. So that's a method of evaluation research. Now the next one is a formative versus summative evaluation. In case of formative evaluation, your formative means improve object being evaluated. Your intention is to the method or the research method, formative research method will try to improve the object being evaluated. So it needs assessment, who needs and how great the need is, that needs to be, that's need assessment. Then evaluative assessment, evaluation, whether evaluation is feasible or not, that needs to be done. Then structured conceptualization, then implementation, that needs to be transparency and the process. All these things were involved in the case of a formative research. So a formative evaluation method actually it is for to improve the object, whatever target that you're going to achieve. Your methods, the assessment and evaluation and structured conceptualization, everything should improve the overall result. So that type of evaluation method is a formative evaluation method in which the object being evaluated is improved. Whereas summative evaluation is there, in which the evaluation is we examine the outcome. So, for example, uh, uh, the impact of something, uh, uh, and the impact broader than the outcome that includes the intended and unintended effects will be there. So if you have some condition that you are going to analyze and or evaluate, and that will have an impact. So intended and unintended. For example, vaccination. Take the case. So vaccination may have a intended and unintended impacts. So that is the outcome. So the summative evaluation will examine the outcome, and that may include intended or unintended impacts, and it needs to be the cost effectiveness needs to be addressed when while the overall outcome, the impact, positive or negative impacts, needs to be assessed, and also the cost effectiveness. For example, if you are vaccinating, whether it is cost effective or not, that needs to be evaluated. Secondary analysis, that is re-examine data to address new questions. For example, after the vaccination, you can see that whether it is successful, or if it is successful, up to what percentage it is successful. For example, Covaxin is maybe it's 80% or 85% successful. So that is the outcome, and that can be analyzed, and whether it can be improved by, say, site modifications, whether it can be improved to reach maybe one example is Covishield. Covishield, initially they said that 4 weeks. After 4 weeks, you can have the intended effect. And now they say that after initial or secondary analysis of the outcome, they can say that okay, this is effective at 12 weeks after the second dose will be taken after 12 weeks of interval. That means it is more effective at that stage. So that is the result of a secondary analysis of the outcome. So the vaccination effect, the outcome of that will be summative evaluation is done, and now they revised that one, so that after the secondary analysis of the data, we reach the conclusion that it is better, the vaccination effectiveness or efficacy will be more effective at a later stage of 10 to 12 weeks. So that's a part of summative evaluation. So meta-analysis is also another one. So there we, as I mentioned, especially we analyze all the possible outcomes from various studies, multiple studies, like 100 research papers can be combined together, and you now analyze the data and synthesize something new or consolidate the data, and that is a meta-analysis. They are actually summative evaluation, where the work is already done. Then after the work, you try to observe whether the outcome has achieved, whether there is any adverse impact or not, and whether it is cost effective or not, and is there any secondary analysis results that will try to improve the original outcome, and to address new questions, etc., whether it is there or not, and whether the vaccination is successful in elderly people, and whether it is successful in uh, infants or not. That type of questions can be addressed during the secondary evaluation. And the meta-analysis, one example is that, for example, there may be 10,000 papers, scientific papers published in COVID-19 related research. Maybe 100 will be on various forms of drug discovery and other things. And you can consolidate all these things and analyze all the data and their efficacy, etc. You try to prepare a review paper, and that is another summative evaluation method based on meta-analysis, which will consolidate the sources, multiple sources, and multiple studies will be integrated, and you will generate a new outcome, and you will come up with new ideas from the consolidated data. So that's a meta-analysis. So that's about summative evaluation. Whereas the previously mentioned formative evaluation, actually, it is not done at the final stage, but it's a formative assessment where you actually control the process, the need assessment or evaluative assessment and structured conceptualization, etc., where we are all our efforts were for improving the product. For example, you design the vaccine, and at that time you will the need assessment of the vaccine, and then evaluation of the efficacy or structured conceptualization in design, for example, whether it is an old vaccine or a subunit vaccine, whatever, and then implementation of and transparency procedures, etc., and the process that you want to, and the formulations, etc., and all these things were actually to improve the final product, that is a vaccine. So that types of work were formative ones. So it is before the final product is produced, whereas the summative one, where we evaluate the outcome of the research. So that's about formative and summative ones. Okay. Any questions?